Tuesday morning in the early sunshine, and as we conduct a Tuesday morning law talk, always a pleasure to welcome various and sundry lawyers from the ranks of those who work at FH&P. Today's guest in studio is Colin Edstrom, a recent addition, or fairly recent addition to the group, if you will. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Yeah, it's my first winter with the group, I guess. I started back in September, so I've gone through. I started when I think it was still about 30 degrees out, and I'm here when it's about minus 10.
Yeah, and you wore your snow boots and your winter coat when you walked over here this morning.
I did. It's very fashionable to be in a suit and winter boots, but I think it's necessary given what we're going through right now.
Absolutely. So listen, I'm intrigued with the title that you sent. You said, Phil, I want to talk about employment discrimination. And I'm thinking, okay, employment discrimination like that, that we're aware that happens at a multitude of levels. But it was the second thought, on the basis of family status. And I'm going to use that as the door opener and say, take me into the scenario, paint a little picture here to set the conversation, and then we'll take a break.
Sure. So, and I think when most people think of discrimination under the Human Rights Code or just discrimination in the workplace, you think of the traditional ones, sex, gender, race, those sorts of things. You can't discriminate on those bases. Everybody kind of knows that. But then the Human Rights Code also contains a provision that says you can't discriminate on the basis of family status. And that kind of catches people a little bit off guard because, well, what is family status? And it doesn't kind of fall into our traditional idea or notion of things that you shouldn't discriminate on the basis of.
I'm a divorced mom. I have a kid, but I might have to leave early a few times during the course of a period of time because I'm going to have to go to the school early, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, and that's exactly the situation that we wrestle with. And that's that you hit the nail on the head there. That's the difficulty that we have as lawyers, and that's difficulty that that parents have, and that's the difficulty that other caregivers have. So if you're dealing with, for an elderly person, your parents, for example, they fall under the rubric of family status. They're clearly your family. You have a caregiving responsibility for them, and sometimes your work gets in the way of those caregiving responsibilities. So what are you to do?
So are we suggesting here, and I don't think you're suggesting at all, that given two women who have filed applications for employment or filled out resumes for employment with company ABCD, and I'm the HR person and I take a look, and while I'm very aware of where Colin Edstrom is relative to hiring on the basis of family status, I look and I say, okay, here's a talented, equipped young woman. And she's 23 years of age. She's got all of the tools and the keys. And over here is a 24-year-old woman who is divorced and has a child. Similar talents and skills. Do you know what? I think I'm going to go for the single woman.
Yep. Yeah, and that happens all the time.
How do you prove it, though?
That's the problem with those ones. In those hiring cases, the difficulty is proving it. So unless the employer gave you a letter or made some communication to you that said, hey, we'd love to hire you.
Love your stuff, but
that whole kid thing that you have going on, we're not a big fan of that. It's going to be very difficult to prove that. You could still, and this happens, people file complaints, but they don't really have any evidence to back it up.
Just what they believe.
Exactly. So those situations are difficult. Where you see lots of times with the where family status kicks in is you already are employed and things are going great. You work the 9 to 5 shift, and then you have childcare responsibilities, or one of your parents gets sick, and now you have caregiving responsibilities for your parents.
So unfortunately, because I lost my babysitter, and because parent-teacher days, or because of teacher, what do we call these days that teachers get?
Professional development
days. I think that parents live in fear of professional development days because they happen so outside of the normal routine. And suddenly, I've got a note from school says that, by the way, next Monday is a teacher development day, and you're going to have to, because the school's going to be closed. And I can't find a place to put my kid. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I'm having to say to my boss, listen, I know I'm working on this big report, but I can't come in today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
black mark?
It's a black mark, but perhaps it's a black mark politically for your career. Hopefully you have a more understanding boss. But is it discrimination? Probably not, actually. And that's the really interesting part about this question is, unlike the traditional grounds of discrimination, which have a fairly low threshold, so gender, sex, religion.
Easy to show if I've been identified because of my sexual orientation and how I dress at work or.
That's right.
Easy to show.
Normally, what you have to do is show you're part of this protected ground. So you are let's say you are a minority, and then you have to show that you've suffered some adverse treatment at work, and then you have to show that there's some connection between the adverse treatment and even a very small one between the adverse treatment.
I've been documenting how my boss has been talking to me, and clearly he has something about me that there's an itemized list of moments in time where we've interacted, and clearly by the words that he said, boom.
Right, exactly. And then once you've done that, you've established discrimination in the normal course, and then it's incumbent on the employer to justify that on a number of grounds. Now, getting into family status, it's the only area of discrimination where there's actually a higher test. And I think there's a higher test for that reason that you just articulated, Phil. There's all these professional development days. There's constant child care obligation. And so if every time a parent said, I can't come into work today because I have to go pick up my child early from school, and the employer said, no, you have to work, and they say, aha, you've discriminated against me, and they run off the Human Rights Tribunal, it would be anarchy in the workplace, quite frankly. And so there's actually a higher standard to prove discrimination on the basis of family status. And even more confusing is that higher standard varies depending on where you live in Canada and what industry that you're in. So it's some people will applaud it and say that's fantastic. It takes a rational, realistic approach to discrimination on the basis of family status, whereas other people will put it off and say it creates a higher test, a higher burden, a hierarchy of rights. It makes it more difficult for people that are in vulnerable situation with kids or with elder caregiving to establish discrimination, and that's wrong. So it kind of cuts both ways.
You know, I have to say that when you said that, no, you have to work, there are any number of bosses who are probably sitting at the other end of the radio and wishing that they had the ability to say to that individual, "You are a key individual in our in our corporate structure. We depend upon you. We've spent significant amounts of money training you further and developing you further, and for you to just bold-facedly say, listen, that's nice, but I'm not coming in today because my kid's got a Pro D day," doesn't work for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you hope that just generally in the working environment, there is some flexibility there because, quite frankly, we live in, I don't want to use, it's not a brave new world, but the society has changed. We have more working parents. Both parents are working at the same time. There's an increased level, I think, of elder care going on. So there are constraints.
Sandwich generation.
Absolutely. There are constraints on families in today's day that there weren't, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so
do some of these attitudes hold over? Some of these attitudes that were developed 20, 30 years ago, that the boss that I'm working for is a gray-old old and clearly doesn't understand the realities of the workaday world that most of us are participating in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to vary from workplace to workplace, of course, but you'll get some people, some bosses, perhaps they're approaching the age of retirement. They were fortunate, or took, maybe not fortunate, but they made the decision back in the day because they could afford it to have the one parent, traditionally back then it would have been the wife, I imagine, stay at home and raise the children. And so all their childcare responsibilities were taken care of. Fast forward to today's date, and you have a large number of families trying to make ends meet with having two working parents. They don't have somebody at home to constantly take care of the child care obligation.
Drama isn't close at hand.
That's right. That's right. We live further and further away from our families nowadays. And so you see some holders. I think that you do see some levels of management that have difficulty accepting the new reality of childcare in this day and age.
Conversation, fascinating. Colin Edstrom in our studios will be here for the next little while, talking about discrimination in the workplace on the basis of family status. If you have, if anything that we've said over the last 10 minutes resonates with the anonymity of radio, love to hear from you at 250-862-2525. Do you feel that you've been discriminated at or by in the workplace, by the company you're working for, by the supervisor who is directly responsible for you, who you report to directly? Got some challenges? This is the guy you want to talk to, Colin Edstrom. We're going to be back in a moment. Fascinating conversation with Colin Edstrom, talking about something that I think many of us feel that we've been subject to, but you have a challenge to prove it, because it becomes one of those areas that there's so many nebulous or gray areas or vagueness, if you will, the fog of time. And how do you prove discrimination based on family status? Probably we all know somebody who, over a beer, or sat at our table and vented about the place that they are working and how they feel that they are being treated. And you look across the table to them and saying, you got to stand up for yourself. You gotta be positive here. You're a talented, creative individual. You just show them who's boss. It isn't quite that easy, is it?
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
What is it? Liquid courage, I think.
There you go.
You're sitting at the bar and you're saying, on Monday I'm going to march right. It's Friday. I'm going to march right in and tell my boss exactly what I think. Right? Yeah. Easier said than done.
If I was $150,000 richer, like Ryan Kay, maybe I'd drop my drawers and turn my back on my boss and say, "So long, buddy."
Yeah, and actually, somewhat disappointingly, I sent that was the $150,000 for the Super Bowl. I saw the Kelowna thing, and I signed up for that as well. I was getting very excited about that, and then sure enough, couldn't pull it off. But
So we're talking about flexibility in a workplace. Yeah. We're talking, So here's a question to you: as someone who is talented, skilled, got a couple of pieces of paper, I've been through some courses, I've emerged top of my class, looking for work. What do I go looking for to find the company that has the kind of flexibility that would adapt or give me the flexibility to be the parent that we're talking about, or the caregiver with my elderly parents, or does the responsibility start with the employee looking for employment? Make sure you check who you're going to go work for first before you apply, because once you're in.
You're right, and it does. The responsibility lies with the employee for the most part. So the employee, you're the one that goes in and has the job interview and ultimately decides whether or not you want to accept that position. Mm-hmm. It's not the employer can't force you to sign an employment contract. The employer can't force you to start on that day. So at the end of the day, it's incumbent on you to agree to the terms of employment. Say, this is a place that I want to work at.
But you know what? If I've been hunting for work and it's been 6 weeks suddenly it looks like somebody's interested in me, I don't even think that I read some of the terms of employment very clearly. I'm just jazzed that I want to get my name on the paper at the bottom line so that I can start working and get a paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. Desperation breeds situations where you might be willing to compromise on things like workplace flexibility. And that's a really interesting segue back to sort of the family status area, is that it's the family status is sort of treated as being static, not dynamic in the workplace. And so if you agreed at the outset that you'll work these hours, and then all of a sudden you say, actually, I have childcare responsibilities, actually, I have elder care responsibilities, I don't want to work these hours, it's going to be very difficult to establish that you've actually been discriminated against. What happens in the traditional course is, at least in BC, is if an employer implements a new rule, a new standard, a new workplace schedule.
But you've already been working there for 2 years.
You've already been working there, exactly.
This
for
is
2 years.
punitive.
Exactly. Well, it might not be punitive. They're not doing it necessarily to punish you, but they're doing it because they just need to change your schedule around because for whatever reason. It's not that
Right.
you've done anything wrong. It's just that we have a new contract. We need you to work 9 to 5 instead of the night shift.
We're having to put a second shift on.
Exactly.
And you're going to start your day at 2 in the afternoon, and you're going to work through till 10 o'clock at night.
Exactly. And what the courts in BC, and they're different than the courts elsewhere, actually, but what the courts in BC have said is, does that change in employment result in a serious interference with a substantial parental or other family duty or obligation? So whereas in the normal course in discrimination, it's just, as we were discussing earlier, is there a connection between your ground of protection under the Human Rights Code and the bad thing that's happened to you? Here, it's a higher standard. Is there a serious interference with a substantial parental or other family duty? So it creates this sort of hierarchy of rights, and so there has to be that change there, where you've said it's not just maybe picking up the kid from my child.
But when I took this job 3 years ago, my mother hadn't had a stroke.
Yes,
my mother wasn't in a care home. There wasn't an obligation upon me. It didn't exist 3 years ago. We got to go to the phones. Billy, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Johnson. You ever heard of family discrimination in reverse?
I'm going to have to get you to be more specific.
Okay, what I mean is, and I think Mr. Edstrom will know what I'm talking about, that certain nationalities will only hire within the family, and if you're not part of the family, and let's say Billy Joe's younger brother wants to have a job in the family, and you're not part of the family, they let you go.
Yeah, and that probably doesn't fall under family status necessarily, but that could fall under other grounds. So you would be discriminating on the basis of your ethnic background, and normally we don't.
Yes, what I'm trying to say is, if you're not part of the family, it's hard to prove that. What I'm trying to say is,
okay, Billy, I'm going to jump in and go here quickly because I get where you are. XYZ company is owned by a family.
Correct.
You've been working for the family, and I happen to have white skin.
Right.
The ownership is brown skin. And let's just sort of put it in those contexts, and then suddenly their relative or their nephew from India arrives, or from wherever.
Correct.
Arrives, and suddenly I'm let go. Is that a tough case to take to the courts, is I think what Billy's asking.
Yeah, that's the gist of it, yes.
Yeah, that's a tough case, but it doesn't likely fall under family status, even though it is family status. It would fall under discrimination on the basis of your ethnic background.
But it's preferential hiring, and I'm the one who loses here.
It is, and maybe we're just calling it two different things. So family status, as they apply it in the BC Human Rights Tribunal, relates to sort of child care and elder care responsibilities.
Got it. Okay.
But you can still get to that point. But you'd be making the argument that you were discriminated against on the basis of your ethnicity, and now normally. The Human Rights Code was implemented to protect people of minorities, for example, that have been historically disadvantaged. But the reverse can still be true here if you're saying, they are discriminating me on the basis of I don't fit within their sort of ethnic background. So you're still getting to the same place.
Is that a case that you can take to court?
You can take that to the Human Rights Tribunal. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Because again, I guess I find myself thinking that, I think that there are times where hiring policies are discriminatory, but not in the ways that we generally see them put out there, because it always seems to be the racial minority that is being discriminated against by the majority. That's
right. It is a bit of a reverse one, but certainly now there could be a very good reason for that as well. It could be a requirement of the employment. It doesn't sound like it's in this case, but that you have a certain ethnic background because it's the it's required for the company. But no, you could bring that to the Human Rights Tribunal. The difficulty with that, though, is you'd have to prove, again, that you were fired or let go or weren't hired or whatever because
I wasn't a good worker. It wasn't because this person arrived out of nowhere.
That's right.
And suddenly their job was given.
That's right.
My job was given to them.
That's right.
Yeah. Because until that time, I've been an exemplary employee, received 3 raises, and have one letter from the boss that says, love having you here and love having you working for us.
Or even I was an average employee and I just didn't deserve it. Not all employees are exemplary, unfortunately.
All right. Listen, given the audience of this radio station, and the graying of Canada, the graying of America, if we will, there are so many people who find themselves here on their Golden Pond years, but also find themselves acting as caregivers to their aging parents and so on. Can we take a quick break? And I'd like to come back and just drill down or narrow down the focus dealing with that area of the conversation. You okay with that?
Perfect.
All right, Daniel, we're going to take a break. When we come back, not necessarily dealing with elder law, but absolutely dealing with the fact that you're a young mid-40s individual. And you've got a successful career going, and then your life quickly changes with some familial changes. One being that your parents have descended upon you, or a parent has descended upon you, and you have some caregiver challenges. Does that get in the way of your employment? Does that get in the way of your successfully driving your career forward? Be back in a moment. Always appreciate it when I have a chance and an opportunity to settle into the studio for a somewhat philosophical conversation with some of the lawyers from FH&P. Today, it is our Tuesday morning law talk, and Colin Edstrom is in the studio. Initially, the conversation started out as employment discrimination on the basis of family status, but it has sort of broadened in context by just a little bit. And he's agreed to go down the path with me towards the somebody that is mid-40s, doing very well in their career, working for company XYZ, and then dad dies, mom is left alone on her own, and so the family agrees that mom should move to Kelowna to live within close proximity to me. And I acquiesce. I had no idea what was about to come my way, Colin Edstrom, because increasingly, as Mom has sort of dealt with some bouts of illness, some flu, seems to have a little bit of Alzheimer's or early onset of dementia, suddenly my life became incredibly more complex, and I'm having to bail from work the odd time to go somewhere to settle my mom out because things just aren't going well. And then suddenly I find that my career advancements aren't happening quite as quickly as I thought that they were going to. And suddenly I don't seem to be falling within the inner circle and within favor. Is that the same kind of thing? Is that discrimination based on family status?
It may be, and I love being equivocal as a lawyer, of course, because that's why you call a lawyer, is to get a direct answer. So that's why I always love responding with "it may be."
It may be.
Yeah. There's actually elder care is treated very similarly to child care because it falls under family status. The key distinction, though, between elder care and child care is that child care, you have as a parent a legal responsibility to look after your child. If you don't look after your child, children can be taken away. You can be charged criminally. You have a legal responsibility.
Duty of care.
Exactly. Absolutely. For the most part, and you do in limited circumstances, but for the most part, there's not that same legal obligation for you to look after your parents. It's a personal choice.
There might be an emotional feeling. There might be a familial demand, but the law does not require.
Well, yeah, exactly. So you don't have that same legal attachment to look after your parents as you do to look after your children. And so probably because of that, we don't see, one, there's way more parents looking after children than there are children looking after parents.
Right.
So just generally...
Today, that's changing.
Yeah,
rapidly.
Exactly. That's changing. But there still are, the vast majority of the cases because of that, look at child care responsibilities. And there's very few cases I've actually discussed elder care. But the ones that have looked at, is it actually do you actually have a legal obligation to look after that parent? And if you don't have a legal obligation to look after that parent, if it's more a preference, if it's more a choice, then it's more likely that discrimination will not be found.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, we go back to...
But on the other side of that equation, on the employer side of things, there's absolutely no obligation on the employer side that we should give you this time off or allow you to suddenly bolt from your job at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And quite frankly, it's very disruptive. And we're noticing that your work level has, your work achievement, your accomplishment level seems to be slipping by just a little bit, Billy.
Yeah, well, and that's a difficult question for employers because every situation is different, and actually, quite apart from discrimination under the Human Rights Code, under the Employment Standards Act, you're permitted, I believe it's 5 days a year in order to take care of your family. If there's a family emergency, you can go off and take a look at them. So just having a blanket, no, you can't go and look after your child, your parent, your whoever else that you're responsible for on a family leave, you're going to run afoul of the Employment Standards Act. So there's always that to consider for employers. There's a couple other things to always consider for employers is the law on family status discrimination is evolving, and it's different across the board in Canada. So whereas there's that serious interference with substantial parental obligation or child care obligation or care obligation, in British Columbia, the test is actually lower in the federal jurisdiction. So it's difficult to say, and there's lots of commentary going back and forth to saying, when's BC going to get in line with the rest of Canada, or when's Canada going to get in line with British Columbia? And the Supreme Court of Canada so far hasn't ruled yet on a uniform test for discrimination on family status. So that's a long way of saying if you're an employer...
Can I just jump in here and say, why?
Not sure.
Why hasn't there been? Because it would seem that increasingly, given the aging of our society, given what's going on societally, that is someplace that the nation needs to really focus in on and get defined quite quickly.
I'm not sure why not. And so the BC case, the leading case in BC is one called Campbell River, and it came out in, I think, 2004 British Columbia Court of Appeal decision. The case in the federal jurisdiction is called Johnstone versus the Canadian Pacific Railway, and I think that finished in 2014. And I don't know if it was appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada or not, but maybe it's just because the two different tests were set out a decade apart from each other that the court hasn't had the opportunity yet to coalesce them and make a final determination.
The wheels of justice and law move slowly. Trevor, good morning.
Good morning. I got a question. You just brought something up I just heard as I got back in my car here to try to catch the end of this guest. You said there's 5 days legally a year. Now, let's say you're... He
said, I think there's 5 days a year.
Okay. Yeah. There's only... Yeah. If your child is sick, you're, by ethical rights, you're not supposed to take a sick day because that's supposed to be for you. So is that saying, so if my child is sick and pneumonia or what have you, I have the legal right to say, hey, I got to go and take care of my child because my wife can't and we got to rotate days. I can take a day. Is that what, am I understanding that correctly?
So under the Employment Standards Act, a person who has a child in their care or has immediate family qualifies for up to 5 days leave for a family responsibility. And so I'm actually just pulling it up right here on my phone. It's Section 52 of the Employment Standards Act, which says an employee is entitled to up to 5 days of unpaid leave during each employment year to meet responsibilities related to the care, health, or education of a child in the employee's care or the care or health of any other member of the employee's immediate famly.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I was right on the 5 days.
But that's unpaid. That's unpaid.
That's unpaid, so yes.
Yeah.
Now, normally, so that's your minimum entitlement under the Employment Standards Act. You may have in your contract sick leave days or family compassion days or family responsibility leave days or however they want to phrase it that goes over and above the minimum requirements that gives you 5, 10, whatever days off per year to take care of yourself or take care of your family.
Right. Okay. No, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that correctly. Perfect.
Listen. I when I heard that, I was going to jump in and say, whoa. Did I just hear you correctly? So, Trevor, I appreciate the call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Interesting. And so, just for clarity, those 5 days are family care, family responsibilities days that have nothing to do with an individual's sick days that are also available to them at work. They are not mingled. They're not merged. They're two separate streams, if you will, or two separate boxes that you're pulling days out of?
Well, that will depend on your contract with your employer. So you're entitled as a minimum to 5 days off for family responsibility leave that's unpaid. It may be that your employer says, we'll give you an additional 5 or 10 days on top of that for sick leave or for other family days. Or maybe that your employer says, look, we know you get 5 unpaid days, but we're only going to give you the minimum 5 days, but we're actually going to pay you for it. So it kind of depends on the arrangement, but at a minimum, you're entitled to the 5 unpaid days under the Employment Standards Act.
Carved in stone.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Quick break. When we come back, continuing and finishing our conversation with Colin Edstrom from FH&P Lawyers. Fascinating conversation this morning. I'm really enjoying this one. Employment discrimination on the basis of family status, but the extensions that are coming out of that are somewhat philosophical, not quite as easily defined. Be back in a moment. Last couple of moments in conversation with Colin Edstrom from FH&P Lawyers. We extended his time here this morning and took additional time on the other side of the half hour. Only because I think that this is a conversation that needs to be held, and I think that there's any number of you that could benefit by what he has to say. I think the biggest challenge is that workplace listening, while high through people listening through their computers and so on, we really need to have this conversation at 10 after 7 in the morning as people are driving to work, because that's where your market is, really, when we're talking about child care, child rearing, and needing to bail from my office and my desk to suddenly rush to the school because my kid is sick and I need to take him home and tuck him in bed.
Right, and if you're working at a if you are working in an open office concept or maybe in a cubicle and you're listening to a conversation on family status discrimination in the workplace, you might want to be putting that on your headphones, I imagine. So,
So I want to come back to a starting point or that I was talking about earlier. How does one investigate the corporate culture? And I said, here's an individual that hasn't worked in 6 weeks. They are totally jazzed and excited that they actually are being offered in a position of employment with XYZ company. How closely do they check the company? I'm much more interested in signing my name on the bottom line of the employment contract. But let's take that out of it. How does one check the workplace culture? How does one check and determine whether or not this is going to be a good fit for me? They have said, we're interested in hiring you. I'm applying to anybody who's got an application or an ad in the newspaper or online, and not being nearly as discriminatory. What should a person do, and how do they check?
It depends on how surgical you are in your job search. If you're just applying across the board to every ad in the classified section, you probably aren't as concerned about the workplace culture as maybe somebody else.
I've got a lot invested in my career.
Yeah.
I've invested 2 years of college, 3 years of college. Yeah. I've got a piece of paper that says I'm pretty darn good. It hurt me incredibly fiscally to not be able to get work for these last 6 weeks. And yet at the same time, I want to protect what I've developed over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and so when you're doing your job search, if you want to find out what the culture is, of the potential workplace, it's really a mixture of the old and the new. The old is if you know somebody there, and lots of times that's how we get our jobs, is we know somebody that works someplace else, and they say,
inside champion.
Exactly. Yeah, talk to that person, ask those questions, and they'll give you hopefully the honest take. The other thing is look online, because a lot of companies now are recognizing that there is this societal shift, and people and employees are putting less emphasis on straight compensation and putting more emphasis on flexibility in the workplace. Mm. And because of that, you'll see employers advertising, particularly large employers, if you're talking banks or telecommunications companies, public entities that say we have a great benefits package, flexible work hours, all these sorts of things, and they'll promote it right on their websites. And there are awards out there as well, BC's top employers, Canada's top employers, and employers take that stuff to heart because they don't want to be in the situation for the most part where they've invested the time and money into somebody, and then that person has a child or has elder care responsibility, and they don't want to lose that person. So they want to have the flexible workplace environment as well. So in terms of how you go about it, I'd say it's sort of the traditional, talk to people, ask those questions up front. And sort of the new, go online, take a look, because a lot of the company that you're applying for very likely could have a little testament on their website speaking to how flexible their workplace is and how they're such a great employer.
Sounds like somebody should develop a website where and maybe it already exists. I don't know. I don't spend nearly enough time online. But somebody should, if you're unhappy with how your company treated you and then exited you out the door, that you have a chance to sort of do an exit interview to the internet world. And your exit interview might not necessarily be particularly complimentary.
Yeah, there's a few places online. The internet is a fantastic resource for making comments about previous employers, and I say fantastic kind of sarcastically, but certainly there are.
But does one go there and look?
Yeah, there's a website called Glassdoor, I think, that supposedly, and that usually it's disgruntled employees, and I always take these things with a grain of salt because we've all been in workplaces where it just didn't work out with somebody. That person goes out in a blaze of glory, they're swearing, they're screaming on the way out, and they think that the world has just treated them, the employers just treated them so poorly, and when in reality, that might not be the case. So like anything online, if you're actually going online and picking a random message board and looking at what disgruntled employees or former disgruntled employees are saying, I'd take it with a huge grain of salt. You're better off trying to talk to somebody in the organization that you know or that knows somebody that works for that company and doing it that way.
I'm quite fascinated because at UBCO, they have a rate your professor. Not that, and you're going through the various faculties and you see the various professors within the faculty. And then there's a side page over here that's the rate your professor. And you go there and you have a chance and you have an opportunity to see what students thought about the lessons that you taught, your presentation manner and style in the laboratory or the classroom, on and on and on. You very quickly get a real idea whether this is a prof that you would like to spend your time with in a classroom.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I was thinking about this the other day. Is I used ratemyprofessors.com when it was still a very nascent way of reviewing your professors, and so it was still emerging at the time. And I put a lot of credence into what the few people who would rate my professors said on that website. And now I think back on it, and I've gone on the website, and they might have 50 reviews or 100 reviews in the last 15, 20 years that the website's been in production. And during that time, the professor has probably taught 10,000 students or something like that. But you get the 50 or 100 that have rated him, and I'm basing my course selection based on that very small sample size.
I hadn't thought of it in that context. Yeah. Suddenly, the professors taught 10,000 students over that career.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's 50 people online that have either said yay or nay, and the 50 people are usually on polar opposites. I love this guy. I love this professor. She or he was the best. And then you get the other person that said, this person is a jerk and they failed me and they're not available, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But yet I, back in the day, was relying on that.
And truly, as you go there, I think that there are individuals who make their course selection and professor selection based on those kinds of reviews.
Oh, certainly. I mean, if I was a professor, I'd have a hard time not going on that website, and then you're reading the comments about you. Some of them are not very flattering, and that goes the same thing with reviewing former employers, right? You don't know. You're probably getting the disgruntled people for the most part. There are kernels of truth for sure in there, but it's the internet and message boards are probably not the best resource.
Colin Edstrom, a pleasure. We've gone another half hour here because I personally found this to be a subject of great interest, discrimination on the basis of family status. Certainly appreciate the work and the preparation that you put into coming in here today. And I look forward to the next time we can spend time together.
Thanks a lot, Phil.
You can find Colin Edstrom at FH&P just over there at 275 Lawrence Avenue. His direct line is, and I'll just give you the number, forget the 250-448-0924. Go to the web and connect with him. He'd love to hear from you.